With 99.9% of the 2019 legislative session now in the books, let's look back at the entire session and see what stands out as the major moments that may have political ramifications moving forward. David, the 2013 legislative session had serious ramifications for Democrats that led to a slew of recalls, a lot of different campaign reaction. Do you think, what reaction do you think 2019 session will have for Democrats?
Well, I'd say Representative Galindo's vote to destroy her county's and city's economy might lead to a successful recall against her, but more broadly, we go back to 1875 and 76 when our Constitutional Convention met, and they did not want a do-nothing legislature. They actually had a number of things they ordered the legislature to do, like legislation to protect state forests or creating a good homestead exemption. But at the same time, they were extremely mistrustful of the legislature and expected a lot of self-dealing. As one scholar wrote, it's after they created the legislature, you could sense that they regretted having done so. And so Article 5, which is about the legislature, is full of all kinds of procedural limits on the legislature to prevent hasty and excessive legislation. They didn't want too many laws, and they didn't want them getting rammed through without people seeing it. So Article 5, Section 21 says that a bill must be read by title when introduced and then read at length, at least on 2 other occasions. That can be dispensed with unanimous consent. This year, the Republicans withheld that unanimous consent on some bills, and I think that's a good move that I hope becomes part of the future legislative culture, because when my dad was in the legislature, he'd read every bill he voted on, but he was a fairly lonely guy in doing that. Tim Foster from Grand Junction, he's now president of Mesa State, would also do that, but the vast majority of legislators don't read the bills before they vote, so if they won't read, then we can at least go to the backstop and have them read out loud by the teacher, and maybe they'll pay attention sometimes to the actual content of what they're going to be imposing on other people.
Joey, how would you describe the 2019 session? Now, again, while there's some action between the time of this taping and midnight tonight, from what you've seen, was there a theme, a vibe? How would you describe it?
It's a good time to be a Democrat. You know, you look at the bills that passed, and, you know, we expected this to be a liberal legislature, and it was. You know, you mentioned the Climate Action Plan, and there were other satellite bills addressing the climate. There was the oil and gas regulation bill that the fractivists have been trying to get for years. There were a lot of left-leaning health care bills. Full-day kindergarten, which was one of Jared Polis's, the governor's top priorities. And Casey Becker, I think, did a masterful job of carrying out Jared Polis's agenda during this session. You know, for Republicans, you know, they'll be back next year drawing up plays in the dirt again and hoping that Democrats will overreach and sour that political middle that we have in Colorado. You know, I've said on this show and I've said elsewhere, I don't think we're a blue state. I think we're a swing state, and Democrats have got the power to send that pendulum back the other way next year if they're as liberal next year as they've been this year.
Natasha, I think if you're going to pick a Hollywood movie title for it, I think earlier in the session we thought Fast and Furious, The Dems Strike Back felt like it, because the speed of how things were going along became a lot of the headlines we talked about on the show. What do you think people are going to take away from the overall session from 2019?
I think that sometimes with a session, well, any session has a start and an end date, but in particular this session had an early sort of start, a preemptive start to it, and it's going to continue on all summer. If people think they're going home from the Capitol and don't have to work on Monday, that's not going to be the case. I mean, we're going to see that with the red flag legislation and with the oil and gas question. I mean, the ink is barely dried on those, and they will be conversations all summer long. Next year, I think we're going to see, we already talked about vaccinations. That's, I think, going to come back. There will be continued conversations about family leave. There will be continued conversations about the death penalty. And I think, yes, on the one hand, Republicans are going to be able to say, aha, we were able to slow it down. They didn't get to pass everything that they wanted to. On the other hand, I think there's an opportunity for Democrats to spin this and say, see, we aren't just a binary party. This isn't just Republicans versus Democrats. We represent a broad spectrum of ideas. We aren't always going to agree. We aren't always going to push through our agenda. And that's a message that could really appeal to Colorado's independent voters. So I think it's too early to tell. I think it's simple to say the Republicans were able to do a lot with that, but I think the Democrats have an opportunity to really use that to their advantage.
Patty, a story that was bigger early in the session and kind of died away as we get to the latter part of the session was the relationship between the legislature and Governor Polis. How did you think that evolved, and as you look at the whole session, what do you take away from it?
Well, I think Polis managed to kind of work behind the scenes. I mean, he got what he wanted, truly, which was the kindergarten thing. Amazingly, the oil and gas bill is kind of the revenge of Jared Polis because it was what he'd proposed on the ballots in 2014. I would say for a movie title, you would be like Sex in the Single-Party Legislature. We forget how we were talking so much early in the session, before vaccination, you were going to, how are you going to vaccinate your child against hearing about sex? The endless sex education discussions, and now that bill is finally at the last second zoomed through. The other one that is, you cannot believe is so late, is the sex harassment workplace thing that came out because of last session's revelations about the legislature. Looks like this one is finally going to go through, but what took everyone so long? How hard is it to just say, behave yourselves?